Walk into 5 different boat dealerships this weekend, and you could buy 5 outboard motors wearing 5 different names: a Mercury, a Mariner, a Nissan, an Evinrude, a Tohatsu. 5 badges, 5 price tags, 5 sales pitches about heritage and reliability. But here is the part the industry does not put on the brochure. In the small outboard class, the motors hiding under those 5 names roll off the very same assembly line, in the same factory in a quiet mountain town in Japan. You are not choosing between 5 companies. You are choosing between 5 stickers on the same machine. Today, we are going to pull the cowling off the outboard motor business. We will show you exactly how one plant came to build engines for half the names on the water, why one boater pays hundreds of dollars more than his neighbor for an identical motor, and which version you should actually be buying. If you have shopped for a small outboard recently, you probably believe you are looking at a crowded, competitive market. You see decades of history stamped on those cowlings. Evinrude, a name that stretches back more than 100 years. Mercury, the American performance legend out of Wisconsin. Tohatsu, Nissan, Mariner. You assume these are rival companies, each with its own engineers, its own factories, and its own closely guarded secrets. That assumption is exactly what they are counting on, because in the portable and mid-size range, roughly 2.5 horsepower up to about 30 horsepower, that competition is largely an illusion. A single Japanese company, Tohatsu, builds the powerheads that end up inside motor after motor, brand after brand. The logos get swapped, the paint gets changed, the price climbs or falls depending on whose name is on the hood. For the buyer, that means the difference between a fair deal and an expensive mistake often comes down to nothing more than a paint color and a logo. But the beating heart of the engine, the block, the pistons, the fundamental design, comes from the same source. This is not a conspiracy theory whispered on the docks. It is a documented business arrangement that has been running for decades, hiding in plain sight on every dealership floor in the country. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a row of shiny new outboards the same way again. So how did an industry full of proud American names collapse into a handful of survivors quietly sharing engines? To understand that, you have to go back to the year the giants started falling. For most of the 20th century, the American outboard business was a brawl between titans. Outboard Marine Corporation, known simply as OMC, owned both Johnson and Evinrude, and for generations those 2 names ruled the water. Mercury, born in Wisconsin, fought them for every single sale. These were real manufacturers. They cast their own blocks, designed their own engines, and employed thousands of workers across the American Midwest. Then the ground shifted beneath all of them. Tougher emissions rules arrived, aimed squarely at the old smoky 2-stroke engines these companies had built their empires on. Retooling for clean 4-stroke technology cost a fortune, and Outboard Marine Corporation gambled everything on a new fuel injection design that never fully delivered on its promise. The technology it rushed to market developed a reputation for failing in the field, and once that word spread among mechanics and buyers, trust in a name that had ruled the water for generations began to evaporate. Warranty claims piled up, dealers grew nervous about what they were selling, and the enormous flow of cash that a company that size needs just to keep the lights on slowly dried up. In December of the year 2000, the unthinkable happened. Outboard Marine Corporation, the company behind Johnson and Evinrude, filed for bankruptcy and collapsed. Decades of American manufacturing history landed on the auction block overnight. The Johnson and Evinrude brands were scooped up in 2001 by the Canadian company Bombardier, which would later become BRP. But here is where the story takes its first strange turn. Even the survivors could not build everything themselves. Developing a modern, clean, reliable small 4-stroke engine from scratch is brutally expensive, and one company had quietly become the master of exactly that. Tohatsu, a Japanese firm that most American boaters could not have picked out of a lineup, had spent years perfecting small, dependable outboards. So instead of trying to crush Tohatsu, the biggest name in the business decided to climb into bed with it. Back in 1988, Brunswick, the parent company of Mercury, formed a joint venture with Tohatsu, and they called it Tohatsu Marine Corporation. On paper, it was a partnership between equals. In practice, it meant that a huge slice of the small outboard sold under the proud Mercury name would actually be born in a Japanese factory. The great American legend had quietly outsourced its smallest engines to the very company it was supposed to be beating. And that arrangement was only the beginning of the web. To see how deep this really goes, you have to travel to Komagani, a small city tucked into the mountains of Nagano, Japan. This is where Tohatsu operates the plant that sits at the center of our entire story. Inside that facility, workers assemble small outboard motors in the 2.5 to 30 horsepower range. And then those very same motors ship out wearing completely different clothes. The identical engine leaves that plant as a Tohatsu. It leaves as a Mercury. It leaves as a Mariner, which is Mercury's own sister brand. For years it left as a Nissan Marine outboard because Nissan Marine was simply a Tohatsu wearing a different badge. And it left as an Evinrude portable as well. 5 names, 1 assembly line, 1 town in the Japanese mountains. Now think about what that means on the dealership floor. A boater walks in convinced that a Mercury is a rugged American motor and that a Tohatsu is some obscure import he has never heard of. He proudly pays more for the Mercury. He has no idea that he just paid a premium for the exact same engine, built by the very same workers, that was sitting 3 feet away wearing the cheaper Tohatsu label. But wait, because it gets bigger. The rebadging does not stop with the small engines. For years, in the mid-range horsepower class, the situation flipped in a way that would stun most loyal customers. Mercury, the American performance brand, did not build many of its own mid-size 4-stroke powerheads. Instead, those engines came from Yamaha, Mercury's supposed arch-rival on the racecourse and at every boat show in the country. From the late 1990s until around 2006, a boater buying a mid-range Mercury 4-stroke was, in many cases, running a Yamaha powerhead with a Mercury cowling bolted over the top of it. The two fiercest competitors in the entire industry were secretly linked by the same engines. When that relationship finally soured and ended, Mercury had to scramble to design its own replacements, and the sharing runs in every direction you can imagine. In more recent years, when Tohatsu wanted to offer large, high-horsepower 4-stroke outboards to round out its lineup, it did not build those from scratch either. It turned to Honda. Since around 2013, Tohatsu has sold big 4-stroke outboards that are, at their core, Honda engines. So follow the chain carefully. Honda builds a large powerhead, and Tohatsu sells it under its own name. Tohatsu builds a small powerhead, and Mercury, Mariner, Nissan, and Evinrude all sell it under theirs. The brand on the cowling has become almost meaningless. It is marketing, not engineering, and the price gap this creates is not small. Take one of the most popular sizes on the water, the 9.9 horsepower portable. The Tohatsu version has sold for roughly $2,600. The nearly identical Mercury version, built around that very same powerhead from the shared joint venture, has carried a sticker closer to $3,200. That is hundreds of extra dollars for a different colored cover and a more familiar name. Multiply that markup across the hundreds of thousands of engines sold every single year, and you begin to understand why the badges matter so much to the companies and so little to the machine itself. Now, the industry will tell you the rebadged versions are not truly identical, that each brand adds its own tuning, its own accessories, and its own quality checks. There is a sliver of truth to that, but the block, the pistons, the fundamental architecture, the part that decides whether your motor runs for 20 years or dies in 5, all of that comes from the same place. So the real question stops being which brand is best. The real question becomes this: why would you ever pay extra for the sticker? Here is where you stop shopping like a consumer and start shopping like an insider. If you know that the same engine hides under multiple badges, you can use that single piece of knowledge to save real money and get better coverage at the very same time. Start with the most direct move of all. When you find a Tohatsu that shares its engine with a more expensive Mercury or Nissan, buy the Tohatsu. You are getting the identical powerhead for hundreds of dollars less. And the savings do not stop at the price tag. In many cases, Tohatsu has backed its own outboards with a longer factory warranty than the rebadged versions carry, in some seasons offering a full 5 years of coverage, where the premium branded twin offered only 3. Read that one more time. You can often pay less money and walk away with more warranty for what is fundamentally the same motor. The badge loyalty that this industry quietly depends on is costing faithful customers twice over. Next, understand the parts angle, because this is where the shared engine truth works in your favor for decades to come. When a family of engines shares a common design, a great many service parts, the impellers, the water pumps, the filters, and countless internal components become interchangeable or easy to source. Think about what that means over the life of the motor. A water pump impeller, a thermostat, a fuel pump, a carburetor rebuild kit, the wear items that every outboard eventually needs, can often be cross-referenced right across the family of rebadged engines. Independent suppliers stock those parts by the thousand, and a knowledgeable shop can match the right one to your motor, even when the original dealer network has long since moved on to the next model year. A good independent mechanic who knows the family tree of these motors can keep your outboard running long after a dealer claims the parts are unavailable. That is how these engines end up still running strong after 2 and 3 decades, while the flashier boat they were bolted to has long since fallen apart. You are simply not trapped waiting on one single brand supply chain. But there is one more name you absolutely need to know, and it is the exception that proves the entire rule: Suzuki. While the other brands were busy swapping powerheads and bolting their names onto each other's engines, Suzuki stayed stubbornly independent. Suzuki designs and builds its own 4-stroke outboards, from the smallest kicker motor all the way up to the largest offshore machines, and it was a genuine pioneer of modern 4-stroke technology back when much of the industry was still clinging to the old 2-strokes. If the idea of a truly independent engine, designed and built under one roof by one company, appeals to you, Suzuki is the brand that never once joined the badge swapping game. And that brings us right back to where we started, standing on that dealership floor, staring at 5 different names. You now know the secret those 5 cowlings were hiding from you. You know that in the small outboard class, a Mercury, a Mariner, a Nissan, an Evinrude, and a Tohatsu can all trace their heartbeat back to one single plant in the mountains of Nagano. You know that even the fiercest rivals, Mercury and Yamaha, were quietly sharing engines for the better part of a decade. And you know now that the smart money buys the engine, not the sticker. The truth is that the outboard hanging on the back of your boat probably shares more with its so-called rivals than any salesman will ever admit. The names on those cowlings are stories, carefully polished and carefully priced. But a badge is not an engine, and loyalty to a logo is exactly what this industry has learned to charge you for. Once you have seen it here, you start noticing the very same game across the whole store, in your appliances, your tools, even your cars. Rows of competing brands that quietly trace back to a mere handful of factories. So the next time a salesman leans across the counter and swears his brand is the only one truly built to last, ask him one simple question: which powerhead is really sitting under that hood? If this pulled back the curtain on something you thought you understood, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started exposing the secrets behind the products you trust every day. We will see you in the next one.